from the Rising Winds, currently residing in Emerald Hills. He is a Paragon warrior and a Knight of the Sword, here to teach you all there is to know about melee in Amtgard. Please give your attention to Sir Raven the Swift.
As Moon just said, I'm Raven the Swift. I'm going to go through some of my accolades first and my intro. Before I was a warlord, I was a Paragon assassin in V8 and a master bard in V7. And then shortly after my warlord, I received my Paragon warrior. I've been playing Amtgard since I was 13, and I'm 31 now, so close to 17 years, I believe. I've gone through 3 of the rulebooks revisions, so my experience is fairly extensive for the rules. I'm very, very rules-minded, so I love battle gaming almost more than I love actually doing non-battle gaming fighting. My recent accolades are my Phoenix League team have won every Worlds that we've had for Phoenix League. I'm a member of Stack Deck. I was a member of the Just Cars for 4 years, and that's where I gained a lot of my experience with team tactics and stuff like that. And currently I'm the captain of Errant Dawn out of the Rising Winds, and we are the most recent Bridge Wars winners. So today we're talking about melee combat and everything that encompasses that, and its wholeness of class battle gaming. We're not going to really touch on militia format or anything like that, because the point of Paragon Academy is that we learn how to play our classes. So at the very beginning, we're going to talk about the major differences between melee classes, specifically martial classes, than compared to magic classes. I'm aware that some magic classes can use melee combat, but predominantly we're going to focus on the martial classes. We're going to hit a little bit on the melee focuses of magic a little bit later. So advantages and disadvantages of playing a martial class versus a magic class, and specifically when you choose to use melee equipment versus archery, spell balls, verbal spells, and stuff like that. So one of the major advantages of playing a melee class is that your resources are fairly unlimited. The only limiting factor is your personal fitness and how long you're able to continue using your resources over a course of a battle game. Ideally, if you can maintain playing at 100% throughout an entire battle game, it means you're using your resources very effectively. If you tend to have undulating output throughout a battle game, you're going to have more and less effectiveness as time goes on. A major disadvantage compared to magic classes is that you have very little mechanical and systematic components to your class. For instance, if you play Wizard, most of the benefits of playing Wizard come strictly out of the rulebook and having spells and different things that you can cast that have a very specific, appropriate use for a particular situation. Versus when you play a martial class, you don't really have those things, right? Like a Wizard can choose to take phase bolts to deal with monks, or they can choose to take fireballs to deal with warriors with non-enchanted shields. They can use Sphere of Annihilation to go through warriors' armor and stuff like that. Unfortunately, as a martial class, your predominant tools are going to be coming out of your martial capability and some things in your class that allow you to deal with certain situations. Like, for instance, playing a Wizard, you can soft counter any class that you really want, depending on how you write your spell list. If you're playing a Scout, you're going to have more of a niche usage for your abilities that aren't going to always be 100% effective against everything, right? Like a Scout, if they have tracking and there's no assassins on the field and there's no one taking teleport, they just have an ability that doesn't work. And they have to tend to rely on their martial capability in more situations, and almost every single situation, than not. But the advantage is that your resources are fairly unlimited, whereas if you take a Wizard, if they don't have any charged abilities and they didn't take any spell balls, they have a very finite amount of abilities per life that they can use. If they took more or less per life abilities, they're going to be more or less effective on a per life basis. Theoretically, as long as you don't sustain too much damage and you have proper magical supports, you have unlimited throughput with all of your capabilities as a martial fighter, especially if you play warrior and you have scavenge. You can basically fight throughout the entire battle game without dying, potentially. So there is the advantage in that in short, you could say that martial classes have a high skill cap because it is completely determined on your physical abilities, and they have a very, very high skill floor depending on your abilities as well. Whereas magic casters have a relatively low skill floor because they are supported by the rulebook with their abilities. So you decided to play a martial class. How do you get the most out of that martial class, and how do you get the most out of your equipment when you play a caster with melee equipment? You need, as a martial class, you need to use your entire kit. You cannot afford to ignore certain parts of your class and support other ones. You need to be able to use everything. And the first part of that is using your equipment. There's tons of people who play martial classes that just ignore having certain types of equipment, either because they didn't realize they could use it. They don't often use that piece of equipment, or they don't specifically focus on that class. We're going to take an example, and we're going to compare Warrior and Scout. Warrior can use basically anything, and they can use javelins. And using all your equipment, let's say you have someone who only uses a medium round shield and 2 short swords. There's a lot of equipment that you're leaving on the table that have value in particular situations that would be much better than just those 2 pieces of equipment. A really good warrior should be seeking to gain maximum armor value out of whatever type of armor they choose to use, or getting maximum armor value, properly fitted armor. They should be using, depending on the type of situation. If you're in a forest battle, maybe you're not going to run around in 6 points of armor. Maybe you're going to choose to use 4 points of armor because it's slightly more mobile and less cumbersome, or more quiet. Depending on the field of battle or the terrain that you find yourself on, a medium strap shield and 2 swords aren't going to be very good. Maybe if you find yourself in a confined situation, you're going to want to use a tower shield. You're going to want to use a flail if you're fighting against people with a ton of armor, just because using a flail is really easy. Maybe also in these confined situations, or again, depending on the terrain, you're going to want to use a different type of polearm. You could use a light polearm when you're in the middle of a field. You could use a heavy polearm when you're in confined spaces, or you want to manipulate people around. Maybe you use a type of short polearm like a down spear, and that's just a different. It has a different situation all by itself. There's plenty of times where actually using a down spear and a medium shield is actually pretty good. Like if you're playing in Bridge Wars, for instance, in the Rising Winds, using a tower shield and a down spear isn't actually that bad at all. It can be fairly good in certain situations. Using a dagger. A lot of people forget to use a dagger. A dagger is pretty good. It's a free piece of, if you're playing a casting class, it's a free piece of equipment that has a variety of uses. You can stab someone in their gaps. You can use it to block a projectile. There's tons of uses just to have a dagger around, and I think every melee class should really have one. There's plenty of situations where you come up against maybe a wizard who can get off 2 heat weapons, and you're like, oh crap, what do I use? Well, you still have a dagger, right? And you can draw your dagger and attack them with it. So think about the equipment you currently use and how you can make it better. I tend to target my armor first and then look at other pieces of equipment, just because armor is universally amazing and allows you to continue to fight more than having different weapons would. If you don't currently have a tower shield, or you don't currently have a polearm, I would recommend getting those things. If you don't have a dagger, I would also recommend getting those things. I'd also recommend getting a flail, because there are situations where they're super appropriate. Second part, we're going to look at our abilities. Remember, again, I said that you can't afford to ignore certain parts of your class. There are plenty of people who will play certain types of classes. Like, for instance, if you play Assassin, when I play Assassin, I almost never cast poison, except for when there's a very, very particular instance where I'm like, I definitely want to have poison against this person, only because I find it a slight annoyance and I don't want to take the time to cast it, recharge it, and continue doing that. I'd rather just keep running around and killing people. But because melee classes generally have a niche in what they work against, because they have such a niche in what they work against, you need to be able to use all your tools. Like if you're playing assassin, you can't afford not to use coup de grace, or if you're playing warrior, you can't afford not to use harden or true grit or shake it off. Those are super important things that you have to use continuously, and you need to keep those in the back of your mind or in the front of your mind to continually use, especially if they're rechargeable. Those rechargeable abilities you should be using continuously, right? If I'm playing a warrior, I need to continuously charge my shake it off, because that's gonna stop wizards from killing me over and over and over and over and over again. Or it's gonna help me hold a point or something like that. So think about using every single thing that you possibly can in your class. Think about different ways you can use something, right? If you're playing a scout and you have a release, maybe you only currently use it on yourself. Think about using it on your teammates too to gain more value out of that spell, right? A lot of times when I play scout, I'm almost always using release on other people, just because of the way it is. They have adaptive protection. I can use that for myself, and I can use release for my teammate to make more people on my team to increase their value. The third part, which is actually the most important part for any melee class and your effectiveness on the field, as I said earlier, is your personal fitness. A lot of times, we're all LARP nerds. We all come from different backgrounds. And a lot of us tend to ignore our fitness and what that entirely encompasses. A lot of people have negative connotations with fitness, like, oh, I don't need to work on fitness, whatever. If you want to be good at battle gaming, you really want to achieve Paragon Hood in your martial class, I cannot stress enough how important fitness actually is. And the first part of that, it is something the most ignored, is your physical preparedness. And what that actually means is physical preparedness is things that you do to train your body to prepare yourself for athletic endeavors, right? This includes doing strength training, doing calisthenics or with weights, or doing interval training to increase your cardio, stretching and mobilizing your body so that you are more flexible and adaptive in combat. Being able to run across the field or take 3 steps, juke to the right, and then immediately cut to the left. Doing these types of things rely heavily on physical preparedness. Without these things, it makes it very hard to do these crazy, grandiose movements without physically preparing your body. You have to do it, right? I cannot stress enough how many people get tendonitis, how many people get jumper's knee, which is a form of patellar tendonitis, just because they don't properly prepare for these situations. Tendonitis happens from overextending on your attacks. That can come from pelling your form correctly, so that when you actually go to use your techniques, that they have a proper form and your muscles are conditioned to do those things. They want to look at, so once we cover physical preparedness, I want to look at basic martial abilities. These are things that I believe are the cornerstone of all fighting, and anyone who intends to use melee equipment should probably be doing these things. And they're little things that like could have huge impacts on your ability to fight on the field. The first one is, I think everyone should be doing block strike. This is just a drill. There's plenty of videos on YouTube of explaining exactly how to do block strike. But basically what this is, you choose 2 sections of the body, and you and your partner go back and forth of, I'm going to attack, you're going to attempt to block. If you block, you may return an attack on me in one of those 2 areas. So say you're attacking my arm and my offside chest. You and your partner will work on going through these combinations. The primary benefit of that is that you increase your defense. If you're a martial class and you can increase your defense, that ultimately increases your throughput. Additionally, it helps you increase your attacks. So if your attacks are more crisp and you're actually be able to get around someone's guard, you're going to have more damage, right? Just like we're characters in MMO, you're increasing your defenses, you're increasing your attacks. These are the basic foundations of martial combat, right? Being able to kill people and preventing and not dying. So we have block strike. Another thing people should do, they should pell. There's plenty of videos on YouTube of how to pell and what that actually encompasses. There's tons of drills on how to pell. You should be able to fluently attack in a proficient manner. You shouldn't have your basic attacks, offside chest, inside chest, across, and something to the body. Like those things you should be able to do perfectly. Like you can just do it over and over and over again. The more the more expertise and technique you can develop in your striking, the more damage you're going to ultimately have, right? I know these are typically associated with people who do tournament fighting or ditch fighting and stuff like that. Unfortunately, the better you are at sword fighting, the better you're going to be ultimately at playing this game and playing in battle games. If you're a wizard who knows how to really do a lot of block strike and can land attacks properly, they can take on a lot of people just because they have the defense of using their short sword on an unlimited amount of times to attack you and defend themselves. And if you can't get around that, then you're going to have a huge weakness. The last part is your footwork. I think everybody should be able to move fluently across the battlefield. You just do some basic movement drills. You don't have to have equipment to do this. You can go out into the street or in your front yard or whatever, or a park, wherever you find it. You work on moving forwards, moving backwards, moving diagonally forward, moving diagonally forward the other way, moving diagonally backwards. You should be able to switch your feet and just move around dynamically across the battlefield. You should be able to sprint for 30 feet, or ideally, you should be able to sprint 20 feet within a spell's range to kill a caster. And you should be able to move that 20 feet before they get the spell off. That's a critical component I'll get to in a second. There's a great drill I love doing for footwork. It's just called ABCs. You get a 10 by 10 square, essentially. You start at one corner. You get in a stance, which is going to be, it doesn't matter which stance you're in. You're going to slowly just draw out the shape, and you go throughout the entire alphabet. And every other letter, you switch your stance. So maybe I start right foot forward. I'm going to draw A. I go through the whole thing. I draw A. I go back to the corner. Now I'm going to switch my feet. All right, now I'm going to draw B. Right? And you practice moving in these really fluid, dynamic ways, right? Like you're drawing out curves, you're drawing out straight lines, you're going to be moving diagonally. These are all super important. Another thing about footwork, as I said earlier, was sprinting. Everyone should be able to sprint, and it should not kill you. Like if you're like, oh, this sprinting is really hard, work on your sprinting, okay? If you're playing a martial class, the primary thing that you're going to be dealing with is killing spellcasters who are casting within 20 feet of you. You need to be able to close 20 feet really quickly. The best casters are going to be casting very quickly, and as a Paragon, right, you're going to be fighting more higher skilled people, because the better you are, the other better people want to kill you, right? Like if you're playing warrior and you're getting really good at warrior, wizards are going to try to kill you, and you need to be able to sprint 20 feet and try to kill them. Obviously, doing it in a controlled manner so you don't run into them. That's another thing if you're actually just controlling your body. So I recommend everyone try sprinting, try doing this calisthenics, try doing these other movements to control your body, learn how your body moves so that you can move more fluently in fights and skirmishes. Okay. So that basically covers using your whole class. We'll have more questions later on. Let's look at weatherization and the type of clothing that you wear. Not a lot of people think about this. People often just wear their garb, however more or less garb they're wearing. They don't always think about weatherization. And depending on what kind of extreme climate the more extreme climate you live in, the more or less specialized your garb is going to be. I know people who live up in the Northeast and people who are in Canada still play during the winter, right? And negatives there. And I'm sure there's very particular types of weatherization that they have. If you live in the Southwest in Texas and New Mexico and Atlanta and Florida, those places get super hot and humid. They have very particular types of clothing that they wear that are different. We're just going to go through some of those real quick. So let's look at weatherization. Heat exhaustion. It's really easy to get heat exhaustion. And how do I prevent that? Well, one, when you get to the field, you need to already have been hydrated. Okay. The type of garb you want to wear. You're going to want to wear linens. Linens are very good. They're way better than cotton or broadcloth. And linen's pretty common nowadays, but people vastly underestimate the benefit of wearing linen. I cannot express to you, after having fought for like 10 years plus, let me think about that, 13 years? I fought for 13 years without wearing linen. And the first time I put on linen, I was like, oh my gosh, this is huge, right? Its ability to wick the the sweat off your body and just help you exhaust your personal heat from just sweating profusely is incredible. I recommend everyone stop wearing cotton, stop wearing broadcloth, get some linen. I promise it is amazing. Another component of heat exhaustion. Some people wear spandex shirts and stuff like that. That's actually kind of fine. I learned once I started wearing linen, I don't actually have to wear an Under Armour shirt or anything like that. It's actually fine. The next part, let's talk about extreme cold. So a thing about extreme cold that people often get wrong is that they over layer themselves. And the issue with that is if you wear too many layers and you're moving around doing stuff, you're going to start sweating. The issue with that is that because you're sweating, you now have moisture on your skin and the wind hits you, or just that moisture then gets cold, and now you have a layer of just cold water on your body, and your body's already trying to fight off the cold anyway, and you can lead to getting like hypothermia. You can get frostbite and stuff like that. I typically recommend everyone having a tight layer and then a puffy layer and then your garb. Typically what that looks like for me, I'll wear a weatherized Under Armour shirt. Those are really good. Those are particularly different than wearing summer Under Armour shirts. I'll wear a sweater or a long garb shirt. This would probably be a little thin because this is just some summer linen. I would probably wear something else underneath this, some type of sweater, maybe a thicker linen, and then I would wear my garb over top of that. And what that does is I have that base layer, that skin tight layer that helps hold in my heat. I have the sweater layer that keeps the wind off of me, and then I have my garb to kind of insulate that a little bit more. I don't want to wear a coat. I would not recommend anyone wear a coat, only because it's going to trap the heat in more than I actually want. Although it does keep the wind off you, it also traps in the cold when it does get into you, and traps your sweat in. Ideally, I want that sweat to come out and evaporate. I don't want it to hold it against my body. People tend to wear like 3 and 4 pairs of socks and mesh shoes when they're fighting in the winter. That's no bueno. You gotta wear some waterproof shoes. You can wear leather boots. Those are completely fine. I normally wear leather boots. I would wear some type of wool sock, just one layer. You don't need 2. Enough to where that insulates your feet and keeps the heat in and lets the water out. I would not wear any type of thin leather shoe, only because that's going to absorb the water from the snow and keep it up against your feet. Those are generally pretty bad. Let's look at extreme wind. One issue with extreme wind is like if you're wearing very billowy garb, it's going to get thrown around and wrapped around your head, or like if you're wearing a cloak, it's going to get wrapped around your body or something like that. Try to wear tighter clothing and wear belts to keep your garb together. Have tight sword covers so that you mitigate the wind being a factor on your sword as you swing. If you have a super extreme wind, whether it's hot or cold, you're going to want some type of windbreak. Let's look at rain. Rain's another one. Not a lot of people fight in the rain, but we do often start a battle game and then it starts raining. A really common thing for people to do is actually just put grocery bags in their shoes around their feet to stop the water from getting to their foot, so they don't get like athlete's foot or trench foot, depending on how much you're fighting in the rain. When you are fighting in the rain, you need to change out your garb. Depending on, it doesn't matter if you're in super hot weather or super cold weather. Having that extra layer of water on your body is super bad most of the time. If you're from Texas, down in Houston, it rains a crap ton in April. What will often happen is you'll start a battle game, it'll start raining, you'll get a ton of water on you, and then the sun comes out again, and you get super duper 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 hot because the humidity. Or if it's slightly cold, you have that cold layer of water on your body now in your garb, and you change out of that very quickly to prevent hypothermia. Okay, that covers most of the things. Oh, hi, Kenzie. That covers most of the things pertaining to your equipment and stuff like that. And what you can initially bring to the field to allow you to have the most amount of effectiveness in any given practice. Let's go ahead and look at teamwork and tactics. This is probably a big one for a lot of people, like how do I get better at fighting? I'm going to take a look at the roles that people can play and their flexibility before we look at tactics. So generally in my mind, I think about, as a melee fighter, I think about a couple positions, and I generally consider skirmish, support, and then the line. A skirmisher is going to be a type of person that does not necessarily stick with a massive group of people. There's going to be scouts, assassins, barbarians, anti-paladins. These people are going to be making attack maneuvers against the enemy team and ultimately being super proactive about what they're doing. Skirmishers need to be very mobile. You need to have good armor that fits them appropriately so that they can be more mobile. Having inappropriately fitted armor can sap your energy quite a bit. And they're going to want to have the appropriate equipment or appropriate weapons for the given situation. You would want to use a light polearm if you're going to use a polearm. You're going to want to use probably a center grip shield if you have one, just because they're more mobile. You're going to have multiple backup weapons from when you're blocking archer arrows or spell balls or what have you. Ideally, the skirmishers are going to be opposite of supports. They're going to be opposite of spellcasters and artillery. We taught a class at SKBC this year about battle gaming specifically. And what it kind of looks like is skirmishers should always stay the opposite sides of artillery. This can be anyone with a bow, projectiles, spellcasters. Because of how threat works on the field. Generally, everyone's scared of bows, artillery, and spellcasters. Well, it'd be really beneficial if the enemy team was not looking at them and you forced them to look somewhere else. So if we took this as a diagram and I had a line here, this would be the archers and artillery, and these would be the skirmishers. As a skirmisher, when I'm pushing the flank this way, the enemy has to turn to address me, right? Because I'm such a close threat. Now, when they turn to address me, this opens up lines of attacks for your artillery and allows them to attack exposed backs. Inversely, when the archers move out this way or just get a lot of threat to the side, it forces people to turn and look at them, which means they're not looking at you when you come in to backstab them. Doing this specific tactic is gangbusters. What you want to do ideally is find somebody, as soon as you start the battle game, immediately before you start the battle game, go find the person on your team that is that person, communicate with them, be like, hey, I want to work on this thing. Watch me on the field, I'll watch you, watch how threat works on the enemy team, and we're going to try to, gain these numerical advantages on the battlefield that come from not just directly attacking people. Opening up these lines of attacks, people throw around the term force multiplier around a lot, and what I generally interpret that is, if my actions against one person are a 1-to-1 ratio, when I go to use this tactic of separating our attacks, this usually turns into 2-to-1, 3-to-1, stuff like that. Just because my opponent's distracted, and what I'm going to do to them is going to end up resulting in multiple actions of damage against the enemy team. So let's look at support. Support is going to be your monks, scouts, paladins, and healers with sword and shield. These can be bards. Bards can also skirmish though. Your supports are generally be next to the line or on the line. The difference is what they choose to take their role as and what they're going to be doing. Because if you are a monk or a scout, you're actually just going to be supporting your casters, and you're going to be preventing people from getting in. So naturally, supports counter skirmish, and skirmish want to basically get around the supports. Support really typically cover up holes in your defenses and allow the body of your team to continue doing the work. Generally, I consider the body of the team would be if you had your mass group of people here. These would be your warriors and anyone standing on the line. Maybe your other healers or spellcasters. Maybe this is a bard and a healer in the back resurrecting people. Your support people are going to be covering the gaps to ensure that they stay safe. and generally counteracting enemy attacks. And then you have your line. And essentially the line is going to be your warriors, barbarians, paladins, anti-paladins, anyone who can basically stand as kind of the center guard and mass for your team. Generally, there's going to be people providing direct protection by numbers. And what that means is the more people standing close together, the less likely that an enemy skirmisher will directly attack into that mass. Just like if you compare like predators and prey in nature, typically predators wait for one-off prey to get separated from the herd. So the line kind of makes up this giant herd of people and kind of congeals them together and makes them feel safe and stay together. This is basically where like tower shield warriors come into play, and less mobile warriors, is because they're really hard to kill, and attacking directly into them is very, 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 very bad. So yeah, the line kind of makes up this group of just protected people. I don't want to say directly that this is like this is your sword and shield wall, only because it's a very limited example of what these people do. I don't find that formations work very well in Amtgard. For the record, formations are generally kind of terrible, only because we are a game of magic and weird stuff, and that just generally doesn't work. And those are not limited to the physical confines of our world, because you can cast spells that do weird stuff, and generally break up formations. If this was militia, formations work perfectly fine, just because there aren't those other weird factors that happen. Like they have to act physically upon you. They have to throw projectiles, arch at you, and attack you in direct melee combat. Okay. Yeah, I think that basically covers everything with roles and how I kind of see those for melee working out. Anyone can kind of play into these depending on what class you're playing. It just depends on your personal play style and where you find yourself at. One of the things I would say is don't force yourself to do something that you don't know how to do or that you don't generally find enjoyable to do. If I'm playing warrior, my happiest time is literally just running as a skirmishing warrior and going into people's backlines and killing them. It would be terrible for me to stand on a line with a tower shield and a spear and just stand there. I would hate that. This also comes into play when you're working with other people. Work to the limitations of your allies and the strengths of your allies. There's a guy in my fighting company named Vaughn, and he is a Paragon warrior as well. We play strictly different from one another. Vaughn is far less mobile than I am and is very, very, very happy standing on the line and guarding people. So look at how these things work with your teammates. If you have someone who's playing a bard, you're like, oh, that guy, hey, bard dude, you could take a bunch of alls and come skirmish with us. And they go, well, I like staying in the back and playing battery bard. Let them do that. Don't force them. Don't force a square peg into the round hole. You know what I mean? All right, let's get down to the nitty gritty, and let's look at basic attacks and resources. Since you're here, I can only assume that all of you want to be paragons. I'm going to preface that before I make this next statement. There's a quote from a famous general somewhere that says, amateurs talk about tactics and professionals and veterans talk about resources. And what does that really mean? A lot of times in Amtgard, we find that people talk about doing this one cool tactic, right? That has no value outside of just doing that one thing. And what that becomes really common in is, as a melee fighter, they're like, you'll see that people visualize attacking. They will attack wizards and healers because they are wizards and healers, and not because they are a weak link on the field. The difference being that I will often attack a wizard because they are the weak person on the field, and that allows me to get into their backline, or I'll attack a healer because it allows me to get in their backline. I'm not doing it because they are a healer. I'm doing it because I would like to identify where the weakness is on the field and exploit that. The more often you can think about manipulating your opponent and manipulating their resources, over time you'll gain more advantages by identifying those things. And those are not limited to what classes they're playing. And the reason this is more beneficial is because maybe you're not always going to find yourself in a situation where there's a weak person there's not a weak class on the field. And there's tons of situations where like you could be fighting. Let's say you're at Bridge Wars. You could be fighting like 5 warriors and then like 2 other armored people behind them and then like 2 spellcasters behind them. So at face value, you're like, oh crap, there's spellcasters in the back. I have no weak person to go attack. Well, if you can train yourself to read body language and read how people are on the field, you can identify where those resources are weak at and where they're strong at, and choose to make an intelligent decision about attacking those areas. Really change your mindset about how you read the battlefield. And this is very hard stuff to articulate. The things that like me and my mentor talk about a lot is like, how do you properly explain that to people? And this is what I found the best way to explain that is you need to identify conceptually where you want to attack and not on an individual basis of who you want to attack, right? If you're playing a monk and you're like, oh, I can block spell balls, immune all spells, I should always attack spellcasters. Yeah, you should always attack spellcasters, but it's more important to identify where weaknesses are because you're a monk and you don't wear armor, right? You need to identify conceptually how your team works, right? Like just because someone's a wizard doesn't mean I keep using an example, but it's just because they don't wear armor. Just because someone's a wizard doesn't mean they're going to be the weak spot. Maybe the weak spot is that actually that warrior over there who has no enchantments. And normally he would look like a hard target to attack because he has armor, but you're like, oh, he's got no enchantments. And he's got gaps in his armor. Cool. Give me wounds kill. I'm going to run over there, go kill that guy and get in their back lines. Okay. I hope that makes sense to everybody. If that was the one takeaway of this class, I would say start identifying things as if they're a battlefield and not as if you were a video game character. And there'll be more questions on that, I'm sure. Let's look at basic types of attacks and things that defeat formations. The main thing about being super, super good in mass combat is I don't know if anyone's ever heard this or not. It is called bringing numbers to bear. And what that often means is you're fighting a superior force or a force with more people. What you need to be able to do is control those people and put them in situations where you have the advantage and they have the disadvantage, despite the fact they may have more people or better people. Bringing numbers to bear means you're nullifying those advantages that they have using superior positioning and resource management. The first type of attack we're going to talk about is teeing. It's like teeing, right? They call it teeing. I just call it making a perpendicular attack. The best possible flank you could have on somebody that wasn't behind them would be a 45-degree perpendicular attack. If I'm playing a skirmisher and this is the enemy line, I want to get to here, right? I want to get to here and attack this one person on the end of the line. If you're ditching, this is a fantastic time to practice this in ditching when you get multiple reps out of this. Ideally, you want to practice getting past this line somehow and getting 45 degrees on your ally and attack this one guy. Say if it was 2 versus 6, right? So we got 6 guys on this line and I got me and my ally down here. Normally, if we just fought them head on, right, we'd be fighting 2 versus 6. If at any point I move down this line, the less and less people I start attacking or have the possibility of attacking me. If we can get like this, now we have 2v1, right? Ideally, what normally happens is I start moving this way, the line ends up doing this, and you end up slowly rotating, right? So what you have to do is create some type of disadvantage, and usually it's feinting towards the center, the line does this, and then you're going to come to the outside, sweep the side a little bit, and get at least an equal advantage where it's 2-on-2 or 2-on-1. And you want to continually press this idea of getting your few force on as few people in the enemy team as possible. So you're always working on teeing. Obviously, this isn't a tee, but it's perpendicular to this one person. Okay? So a perpendicular attack is what you're going to look at. The next we have is the L-shaped ambush or the L-shaped attack. This is kind of similar in what it actually does. And the L-shaped ambush, essentially I lead someone coming straight at me, and then we have a diversionary force that comes in from the side. So if you were head-to-head with an enemy team like this, I would want to lure them in to where something like if my ally's over here, I want to lure them into the situation where they come like this, and then my allied force comes over and hits them like that. Or if I'm like a line, maybe this corner breaks off and ends up doing this, right? So we were a line before, and then this corner comes in like this and ends up doing something like that, which is still like teeing. The issue is, or the difference is that my thumb here makes up the bulk of the line, and my index finger here makes up the flank of the line. A lot of times in Amtgard, you hear this called bull and horns, or hammer and anvil. Hammer and anvil is the most applicable one, only because you have the anvil, which is the bulk of your force, and the hammer that sweeps around. I like using an L because I like keeping my forces together. Typically, when people explain hammer and anvil, the hammer comes way to the outside and gets all the way behind them, and it's less strict. Segueing into that, we have the anvil, the bull and horns, and the false center. And what these are predicated on is that you have the main body of your force, and you have one or two flanking forces, and you're getting position and encompassing your enemy and surrounding them. The main difference between the hammer and anvil and the bull and horns is the hammer and anvil, you have one stationary force and you have a mobile force that comes around, gets behind the enemy, and sweeps them into the anvil, ultimately sandwiching the enemy and crushing them. The bull and horns and the false center are very similar, slightly different. The bull and horns is similar to the anvil in that you have not one flanking force, but two flanking force, right? And if you think of the bull and horns, you have a bull skull and you have two horns that come like that. Same thing, you have two flanking forces instead of one. You encompass the enemies and crush them. The false center has a little bit more setup to it, and what that kind of looks like is you basically bait your opponents into coming forward. You give up ground, and basically as you give up ground, right, our center collapses, our sides fold in on the enemy and crush them. And basically just bait them in. You start doing this, you collapse your center, the enemy is right here, you crush them from the side. So these are just flanking maneuvers. It just depends on what the setup for them is and when they're most appropriate. Yeah, and they're also super ancient tactics that have worked forever. Something I found really beneficial. This is going to be continued education, but I'm going to mention it now. There's a Wikipedia page for military tactics that I recommend everyone check out eventually. They're pretty cool. There's more coming to that. Covered that. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes, everybody. My bad. Let's go ahead and look at continued education. A lot of times in Amtgard, we don't think about looking at other resources for information to educate ourselves. A lot of times we just want to do the thing inside of Amtgard and learn from that environment. And I'll tell you, we're just a bunch of foam fighters who cast magic spells at each other. And there's a ton of resources from other people who have been engaged in military combat since the dawn of humanity. And we have documentation for that. I would highly recommend to everybody, there's a YouTube channel, I think it's called Ancient Armies, that makes videos on ancient military tactics and has visual diagrams for them, and has been phenomenal for me just understanding how all that works. Especially if you were the type of person who loves history, that's a great educational thing you can look at. As I said earlier, there's a Wikipedia page for ancient military tactics, and that outlines almost every single military success in human history and looks at how those happen. For instance, you always hear about Agincourt. Agincourt is kind of where the false center was used very heavily and famously. And if you don't know about Agincourt, basically it was decided to, I think they're outnumbered like 2-1, 10-1, something like that. And it had rained on the field the night before, and their tacticians identified that it had rained and that the ground was super, super mushy. So what they did was they unsuited the bulk of their force, took off all their armor, hid them in the woods, and then they put all their knights out into the center, baited in a full-on attack from the French, and the French stormed the field with their cavalry, and because horses are super heavy and they're all wearing plate armor, it turned the field into a complete marsh, right? It was all muddy and dirty and crap. And once they were fully engaged, I think most of the knights died from the English side, but once the French had engaged all their forces in the middle of the swamp, basically the English basically came out from the woods and wielding like hammers and picks and like swords, but not having any armor, so their dexterity was increased. They came out and just killed the French. It's one of the most significant military victories in human history. It's just something that I found was really cool. You can find stuff like that in that Wikipedia article. Those are really beneficial. Books. I don't know of many paragons who read about how to be really good at fighting. Fighting on a battlefield, at least. There's some books that I love to read that I found infinitely beneficial to me in my pursuits of being a paragon. And one of those books is Book of the Five Rings. Love Book of the Five Rings. A lot of people have read it. If you haven't read it, strongly recommend it. It's by Miyoto Musashi. Everyone has read The Art of War, but I don't really see people implementing those things from The Art of War. The Art of War is fantastic. Another one is The Fighter's Mind by Sam Sheridan, and that's really awesome. It's about a guy who traveled across the world really and studied the mindset of other fighters in the world and what he took from them and the unique things that they do. It's just a phenomenal book. Another one that I think is amazing, has been a huge impact on my fighting career and how I battle game, is called The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. Josh Waitzkin is the guy who the movie Becoming Bobby Fischer's based off of, and he's a prodigy chess player, and nowadays he's a world champion, Tai Chi Chuan push hands champion. He's and currently works in judo. I think he's working on becoming a judo master. So it's just about this guy and his thoughts of how to teach yourself and how to mentally prepare yourself for competition, and how he did it across multiple sports. It's a super, super, super good book if you're looking to be competitive within Amtgard. I would also recommend anyone to use YouTube. Use YouTube a lot, especially if you're learning especially if you're looking to increase your martial capabilities for Amtgard. There's tons of videos on pelling. There's tons of videos on footwork. There's videos on fun drills you can do with you and your friends, especially if you're in a fighting company or just a group of people who want to be paragons together. Do these drills together, learn together, have fun together. That's kind of what it's all about, and it'll make it less difficult for yourself. I know sometimes learning things by yourself can be kind of tedious. So yeah, there's videos on block strike, pelling, footwork. I would also take some education on armor making and how ancient knights put on their armor and how possibly you can improve your own personal kit. One issue that we have with martial classes in Amtgard, we're not very good at actually wearing armor, and we're not very good at making armor either. This will help you a lot in finding how to wear your armor very comfortably, and how to get it to fit you in an appropriate way. One of the issues we have is with our armor is that it's normally non-anatomical, and it ends up becoming very, very uncomfortable to wear. And if you want to make your own armor, that's great. If you want to buy armor, that's also completely fine. Whatever you can do to figure out how to make that as comfortable and bearable as possible, and not to make it cumbersome. One of the main issues we have is that people just don't want to wear armor because it's very cumbersome, because we just don't know how to wear armor. I can't express that enough. And my perception of wearing armor in Amtgard versus wearing armor for steel combat, I didn't know. I thought I knew a lot about armor before I did steel combat. I know nothing. I know nothing. And now that I have better context of how to make more comfortable armor for Amtgard, when Amtgard ultimately opens up again, I know I'm going to make adjustments to my kit to make me more competitive on the field and make me a better fighter. Ultimately, that's what we really want to do. So looks like we have about 40 minutes left, so I'm going to fill in some time with some other things. I'm going to talk about teamwork. This is probably the second or first best thing you could take from this lecture. And how do we do teamwork? In Amtgard, we typically struggle to do teamwork in a non-cooperative way. Especially with the prevalence of V8 and how we play the game right now, it encourages people to be very hero-mental, especially with our Paragon system. It encourages people to be heroes, right? And heroes in your own right without using a lot of teamwork. And I'll tell you, the best way to become better at this game and to be competitive and get results from a competitive tournament, like playing Phoenix League, is to develop teamwork on a day-to-day basis and how to do it with anybody. Because the better I can work with people, the better that I'll ultimately be at my class and the more I can show off my skills. So how do you start doing teamwork? Is if you went to your park today and you start your first battle game, hey, it's our cat. And we started today, you got your team selected and you're about to start the battle game. I would find the most proactive person and the most influential person on the battlefield and go talk to them and develop a strategy with them of what you want to do. If I'm playing a scout, I'm going to probably go find a wizard, or I'm going to find an archer, or maybe I'm going to find a warrior who's like maybe the head of their fighting company and like a lot of people gravitate around them. I want to go talk to these people who are these movers and shakers who can help me perform better on the battlefield. If I go talk to a wizard, I'm going to go, hey, I want to work with you. And they go, oh, what do you want to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to draw a threat to this side of the field. And when you see their back turn, I just want you to throw spell balls at them. Or I want you to go super aggressively to this flank, throw some spell balls at you, and I will cover you. I'll hit them in the back. I'll make sure you don't die. Just that by itself is ridiculously powerful. If I'm playing assassin, I would go find a warrior and be like, hey, dude, you want to charge the field with me? And what I'll do is when we run up to the field, I'm going to teleport. I'll get behind them. They'll try to attack me, not realize I'm teleporting. They go, oh, crap, you get to hit them in the back. And what I'll do is I'll come out of my teleport when they all try to attack you, and I'll hit them in the back. There's a force multiplier right there, right? You're going to hit a bunch of people in the back. You trade off threat, and you're really manipulating the field together. Doing these things encourages other players to perform better, and it directly benefits you in your own performance on the field. Just doing that little thing will make you so much better at playing this game, because becoming a Paragon isn't just about like how good you are at playing your class. It's how good are you as a player and how you manipulate the field to get more results. This is kind of echoing back that mentality of tactics versus resources. If I just become the best player if I just become the best scout that I can, that is not as valuable as if I target how to be the best player I can be and how can I do things that gain me multiple advantages of being a better player and showing off my skills and not just being a better scout, right? Hey, buddy. Our cat's here on my desk. That's really also how you get multiple Paragons, is that you need to step out of the confines of your class and think about how to be a better player. And that's really how you do it. As I stated before in my intro, I'm a master bard and I'm a paragon assassin, and I would actually just tell you that I play those classes the exact same way. I just have a different tool set, and if you can think about that, you can probably paragon multiple times just off of that ideal. Um, I play a skirmishing bard. I use sword and shield or 2 swords. Assassin uses 2 swords. I don't use a whole lot of projectiles when I play assassin because I can kill people faster with swords. And really, I kind of do the same thing. I pester people and I flank people, and then I make them go away, and I create openings for my teammates to come and hit them in the back too. And I trade off threat with my teammates, and I'm just play a general nuisance, pretty much. It just depends on how I want to play a nuisance. If I'm playing Bard, I'm going to take 2 swords, combat caster, and a bunch of Awes. If I'm playing Assassin, I have armor, and I have 2 swords, and I have poison weapon, and teleports. It's just another way of being frustrating. So yeah, teamwork. That's basically how you do it and how you start doing it. Start off by just going to one person and say, hey, I want to work with you. And every single battle game, once you feel comfortable doing that, okay, now start incorporating more people. Start encouraging people to work together and be better together. You'll get better. Your teammates will get better. Your park will get better. And everyone just gets better together, and really, really pushes your development as a fighter on the field. Let's look at equipment real quick. Sorry, that went much faster than I expected to. Equipment. A lot of people tend to just make whatever equipment they have and tend to use it. Like I said earlier, a lot of people come to the field with a medium shield and 2 swords. Think about how you can always make your equipment better. Don't take the easy route and just use whatever you have. Obviously, if whatever you have is whatever you have, that's fine. But we're trying to be paragons here. We should be trying to develop our class and really push our expertise and push how people think about our class and make it better. I know, for instance, not a lot of people play Scout. On paper, Scout doesn't seem that amazing compared to other classes, but I'm sure there's tons of ways to play Scout that we haven't thought of yet. And that's just because we haven't used our equipment that appropriately. What I mean by pushing your equipment, think about what technologies you can use to have better equipment. Don't use some random crappy sword that you have. Make better swords. Find out ways to make better equipment. Find out ways to make better pole arms and swords and armor. Armor's a really huge one as far as making good armor. Like, a lot of people just wear steel 18 gauge plate, or they wear steel brigandine or lamellar. Like, we don't have to do that, right? We can find better ways of doing it. Try to min-max your armor as best try to min-max your equipment as best you can, not just your armor. Like, a really common thing I see is a lot of warriors wearing chainmail and a gambeson and whatever. That's very cumbersome, and I don't like that. As a small person, I'm like, I want to have as minimum weight and maximum value as possible. I don't want to carry around a bunch of mass on me. My personal equipment when I play warrior, I wear an aluminum breastplate, an aluminum lamellar harness, and that harness is aluminum, so I get typically -2. It's heavy gauge, so I get +1. It has superior overlap, that's an additional +1. But my armor is also anodized, which gives me +1 for superior construction and superior appearance, just because it's red. And I wear chainmail, I wear shark mail underneath of it, which could give me a +1 for gambeson as well, because chainmail can be worn as a gambeson. I think my breastplate weighs 5 pounds. I think so. I think it's 5 pounds. And I don't really want to wear anything else other than that, because that is the most min-max thing you can possibly do in our rule set. You can also use titanium if you want, but I would look at min-maxing your armor. I know that aluminum riveted chain is very popular. That's actually pretty okay. It could be a little bit better. If you're building armor from the ground up, definitely do research and find out how to make the most efficient type of equipment, depending on what your costs are and what you are looking to spend to make your own armor. Amtgard is a game of craftsmanship, and I think everyone should make armor. You can certainly buy it, no judgments. Definitely push your own education about how to make armor. Don't just make subpar armor because that's the only way you know how to do it. Push your own knowledge. As a Paragon, I always express to people to push your own knowledge about things and become a better player. That's part of it. Yeah, that's pretty much it for equipment. Let's look at magic classes who want to use melee equipment and kind of the advantages and disadvantages of that, and why I actually love playing a magic class that uses melee equipment. As you can see, I have my druid sash on, which is the most recent thing I was playing before the COVIDs happened. I have my cool little runic enchantment strips. So we're going to talk about the limitations of magic, and that their effectiveness can be finite because they have per life spells, right? And a lot of times with magic, their effectiveness comes from using crowd control spells, and which are again finite, and they have no real way of actually like dispatching somebody, killing them, right? In a lot of scenarios in Amtgard, I find that just killing people, as long as you're not playing an instant respawn game, is perfectly fine compared to using a finite resource to dispatch them. For instance, if your respawn is 30 seconds, I could just kill you, or I could cast Icy Blast, right? Those both last 30 seconds, ostensibly. Except when I Icy Blast you, you can just come out of it on the same position you were on the field. If I kill you, you have to walk back to your base, count out 30 seconds, and then walk back to the field, which can be more cumbersome. So what I like to do when I play magic classes, I will always use a melee weapon, because melee equipment has unlimited defensive properties, has unlimited offensive properties, and it can kill people. When I play Bard has no innate spells to actually kill anybody, and they have one hard CC spell, which is stun, and it's a per refresh spell, which is extremely finite, right? So what I like to use, have a good amount of equipment, right, to give me a lot of kill potential, and then have a ton of verbal spells that give me finite control over the battlefield. So another thing about magic is obviously, like, depending on the school of magic, you have more or less people with resistances to those things, which means you have more or less effectiveness depending on the composition of the enemy team. If they have a bunch of barbarians and you're playing Bard, you might have a bad time because all your spells are per refresh that affect them. So what you want to do is use melee equipment to balance out your toolkit. That way you have a very versatile level of effectiveness against people. Bards can use 2 points of armor. They can use sword and shield. They can use 2 swords. They can use long swords. Combine that with maybe getting enchantments, and it can make you very, very effective on the field, killing people. And because they have Dervish and they have Oz, they can control the battlefield very, very effectively. There's some people who play healer that like taking equipment, which is fine if you want to be more dynamic and maybe play a skirmish healer. You can take CC spells, you can take your equipment, and have that throughput to deal damage on the battlefield, right? Druids can kind of go either way. Druids are very good at doing melee in conjunction with their magic. They're very Eldritch Knight if you play D&D. That's how I kind of roleplay my druid as an Eldritch Knight, just because I think it's fun to do and fun to roleplay like that. You can play wizard with melee equipment. If anything, you use a dagger because it's unlimited. Again, like I can block a projectile with a dagger. I can mend it. You can also use a short sword if you want. I tend to not really do that as I play wizard because their spell balls are so good. Yeah, I love using melee equipment as a magic caster, and if you're not doing that, I would seriously recommend training your martial capabilities to match your magic capabilities, and also maybe become a better Paragon. Paragons that can do both those things together, especially bards and especially druids, if you can use your whole toolkit, again, what I said earlier about playing melee classes, you cannot afford to use none of your toolkit. If you can use your entire toolkit as a spellcaster, and it's not just your spells, it's your equipment as well, you become a seriously dangerous threat on the battlefield. One of the best casters, 3 of the best casters I know, play magic classes. They play different magic classes, and they all use melee equipment. Sir Manimal from the Rising Winds plays a very devastating bard and druid. Sir Smurf from the Rising Winds plays a very, very dangerous druid. Because they know how to use these verbal spells, and their martial capabilities are pretty good. Forgot what Denny's persona name was. Denny plays a wizard and uses a short sword. If you guys know who Denny Caldell is, he's a Paragon healer, Paragon wizard. Yes. He's very good at using his short sword. He plays wizard predominantly. He uses a spell ball in his right hand or his left hand. Cads. Yeah. thanks, Woodrow. His name is Cads. And he plays a very aggressive wizard using teleports and other types of magics to put himself in a position where his short sword is very effective. Again, because it's an unlimited damage tool, right? These aren't just like these aren't just pieces of equipment. These are your tools of playing your class, right? Don't ignore your equipment. These are things you need to be successful. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going over my notes again. That's not really my class thing. What it is. Okay. Another thing to consider as a melee combatant is that I would recommend to everybody to study other battle games and figure out how you can be most effective within that battle game. A lot of kingdoms tend to post their kingdom battle games on their Facebook pages or in the event page. You can look at those things, open up their documents. They probably use Google Docs for their battle games. Open it up. If they have a diagram for the battle game, look at the diagram, study the rules, and figure out, create a problem solving scenario where you can examine these things and look at them and see how you can perform better on the field. Like if you're playing a warrior, look at the shape and terrain of the field and see how you could possibly position yourself to be really effective, or maybe what types of equipment you would use. Go through these scenarios with yourself and learn how to battle game. Learn how to play in any type of game. You should not, if you're playing a Paragon, or you want to be a Paragon, you should not be limited by a terrain choice. If you're like, oh crap, we're in a cave today, when whatever properties a cave may have, right? Limited visibility, can't shoot around corners because you're playing a scout with projectiles. You should not be limited by the terrain. You should be able to change out your equipment to what you need to be able to do for that particular scenario and still be very effective. There should not be a situation where you're not effective as your class. If you have, then you've probably specialized in some type of way, and you should probably learn to be more adaptive. If you're playing a warrior does this really good. Barbarian does this very good because they have a vast array of equipment. They can use any equipment they need to fit this particular situation. Just like a wizard or a spellcaster uses their spells as their tools to fit different scenarios, you should be using your equipment as your tools to fit different scenarios, right? Just like I said earlier, changing out your armor, changing out your shields, changing out your damage weapon, if it's a short sword, long sword, spear, great sword, polearm, whatever. Learn to be adaptive, learn to fit yourself in a particular combative scenario. Got about 6 minutes left before we start taking questions. I believe I kind of want to start taking questions right now. Sorry, I'm just communicating with the directors. Okay. So there are currently no questions in chat. I'm gonna go ahead and open this time up for questions as I finish my finishing thoughts for this class. So if you have questions, please put them in chat and I can start taking them. Okay, so we have one question so far. What are some good ways to reduce excess motion when it comes to leg armor? I run around a lot and my tassets can flap around a lot. I think this is going to be largely a harnessing issue with your tassets. I don't know how your tassets are set up, if they're set up to your breastplate or they're set up to your belt. Those are two different types of tassets. Typically, you have plate tassets attached to your cuirass. If they are lamellar brig tassets, they're typically attached to your belt. I don't wear tassets. They tend to flop around. But what you can do is you can increase the surface area of the tasset and increase the vertical thing that something that holds it to your belt. And typically you have like two loops and then tasset is like this. And what you can do is instead make it a longer strip. Instead of having two things, I would just take those off and then make a long one and attach it to your belt. And because this has a larger surface area, this should stop any type of horizontal or vertical deviation because it's just more tightly attached to your belt. Alternatively, you could look at more rigid strapping. Instead of using a soft leather, maybe use a harder leather. I wouldn't recommend carboiling it. I would just use a tougher sole leather that you could get at Tandy, I'm sure. I just don't know really what type of tassets that you have, so it's a little difficult for me to say. But yeah, I'd probably recommend just going with a larger strap. The tassets I wore, for instance, were attached to a belt, and across the entire tasset was just attached to the belt, so they had no deviation this way. Okay, lamellar torso, lamellar tassets. Tried both alternative leg armors. Yeah, if they're lamellar tassets, they're attached to your torso. I would try to attach them to multiple points. That way, the only deviation you really have is slightly vertical. Or if they're attached to a belt, that works perfectly fine. I would just try to increase the amount of anchor points you have horizontally across it. That way it doesn't flap up. The tassets I wore, again, were to a belt, and they just went around my waist, and those never really flopped up. So I didn't have any issues with that. As far as alternates for different leg armor, the legs I currently wear are brig legs, and they stop. There's probably a gap in my leg about close to a foot between where my leg armor stops and my hip begins, and I just wear a chain shirt over it. Another option would be you could have a gambazon that extends past your torso and down your leg slightly. That way it covers that gap. You can wear chainmail. Chainmail does the exact same thing and has a higher point value. That's what I use. I wear a sharkmail shirt that covers my arms, my chest, and down to my thighs, and then I put broad pieces of armor over that. And because the way it averages out, it ends up I only have to cover 50% of my particular area in that type of armor to get maximum value. And the chainmail makes up the other Shark mail is like 3 points of armor, depending on where you play at. And that could be more or less beneficial. But chainmail really does cover, just like a gambeson, it really does cover up those gaps that you have. And because it's so light and thin, that it doesn't really get in the way, and it exhausts sheet very well because it's just chainmail. So I use that to cover up my butt and my upper thighs for where my leg armor does not cover. Okay, guys. If there's any other questions, please put them in the Twitch chat. So Winjo can give those to me. My closing. Oh, what do you think the most optimal shield shape is and sizes? So this is very specific to your body type. Everyone who plays Amtgard, I'll get to the other question here in a second, Haron. Everyone who plays Amtgard is different, right? You can be big, small, tall, short. Everyone's totally different. Theoretically, the most optimal shield shape size is actually an oval, because humans are long. We're a rectangle. We're not a square, right? If you have an oval, right, it covers the most surface area of your body, and theoretically can provide you the most benefit. If you're a larger person, I would highly recommend not using a strap shield, only because you have more surface area to cover, and you're limited by the range of motion of your arm on this plane, right? But if I have a center grip shield, I can cover much more of my body for fewer motion. If you use an oval shaped center grip shield, that's pretty good. There's a couple people in the West that use it. Sir Monkey and Golden Plains uses one, and those are pretty effective. The cool thing about them I like too is that you don't have to use a medium shield. They can be a small shield, and they're really effective. So as far as optimal shape and size, it really depends. When I use a strap shield, because I'm slightly smaller, I don't use a maximum medium, because the issue is it gets in the way of my sword arm when I'm swinging, and I don't ever want to swing around my shield. So anything I can extend out like this, I don't want it to cross the line of my shoulder. So I tend to use a center grip shield a lot. And when I play classes, if I'm playing anything that uses a small shield, I always use center grip. I never use a strap shield. Just because they're pretty good. I like using them. I hope that answers your question. So examine your own body type. Think about what you might want to use. I'd highly recommend everyone to try center grip shield and try oval at some point. So Heron's second question, is shark mail sturdy enough to point armor to like a gambeson? Yes, it is. So my current setup on my armor is I put my shark mail on, I put my cuirass on, and then I point my shoulder armor to it with using paracord. I take the innards of the paracord out. I close it back up using a lighter, and I use that as my pointing thread, and I just put it through the loop, or I put it through the rings. It's kind of difficult. You got to make sure that it's small enough to where it goes through the ring. I haven't had any of them tear out, and I've been using it for 4 years. So I point my shoulders to it, my pauldrons, and it covers my arm. I point my elbow cop here, and it has 2 points going here and here. And then I point my bracer on to the bottom here and here. Well, it points here, and I just close it up. So I have it's called a floating arm system. So I have my bracer, my elbow cop, and my pauldron, and I have no rear brace because my pauldron comes down to here. I don't really need one. It seems to work perfectly fine. As long as someone's not trying to rip your armor off, I believe it is sturdy enough. Yeah, no problem. I hope that's beneficial. Yeah, try different shapes and stuff. It works out pretty well. And don't be afraid to experiment with stuff. Everyone's different, you know. The one thing I would probably say is also I used to be strictly against tower shields until the last couple years, and I realized they're really, really, really beneficial. I think everyone should try out using a tower shield. I think especially for battle gaming, if you can play a warrior and you get a Bue shield, a tower shield is huge. If you want to just shut down a person who's better at fighting than you, use a tower shield. Like, it cannot hit you, and it's really, really difficult to deal with. This kind of blew my mind when I was playing warrior against another warrior using a tower shield, and it was just so difficult for me to try to kill them. I was like, I gotta use it. I gotta try getting one of these. These are awesome. It doesn't matter what kind you have. You can use a rectangle. You can use a large teardrop shield. Just try it and see if it works out. Use whatever is fun. Try to experiment with stuff. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I kind of want to wrap up the class for you guys. I appreciate all of you coming to my class. I'm sorry if it was a little clumsy. I had to fill in for some gaps. I thought it was a little bit longer than it was supposed to be, or a little bit shorter than it was supposed to be. So things I cannot stress to you guys enough that you take away from this is please work on your physical preparedness. Work on your martial capabilities. If you're playing a melee class, that's your class. Your class is being good at fighting. Work on your fighting. You don't have to be super hardcore and like be a tournament fighter, but certainly work on those things. These are your skills. These are your classes are entirely predicated on your skills as a swords person, right? You have to do these things. Think about how to optimize your equipment and be studious about finding new information about how to make you better at your class. Outsource and find other resources outside of Amtgard that will make you better at playing your class. The last part, use teamwork. We are a game that is entirely based on teamwork and not being a hero. You can get pretty far by being a hero and finding your own recognition as being a good warrior or something. But really, we all get better when we work together. And we ultimately become a more enjoyable game when we're all working together and sharing experiences and playing together. Okay? I cannot stress that enough. Teamwork is so important for our game, and it's important for the health of your park and making sure everybody's having a good time. And also for you to be better and for you to achieve Paragon is working with other people. That's all I got, guys. And thank you very much. And I appreciate you coming to my class. Have a good day, guys. It's Raven the Swift. You can find me on Facebook as Adam Harrigan. Have a good day.
Thank you, Raven. That was Sir Raven the Swift with his melee lecture. I hope you all enjoyed that. We're going to take a quick break to set up our next presenter. Here, let me switch to the proper slide. There we go. Please stand by. We're going to set up Mabtik. He is coming up next with our magic lecture at 4:30. While you are waiting, please go take a bio break and check out our silent auction on the Nine Blades Facebook group. There's some really, really cool stuff there, and all the money goes towards supporting Amtgard in the Nine Blades. Thank you so much. We will be back momentarily.